Welcome to Current Issues with Dr. Kirk Meighoo for the 9th of October 2018. I'm glad you're here. We begin with today's memo, Mental Health and Crime. It's been 3 weeks since Nishal Sankat attempted to steal a plane in Florida on the 20th of September. Since then, much of the country has been debating various aspects about mental health, crime, and, it must be said, privilege. At first, this was considered a potential terrorist threat, potentially carrying some of the worst penalties possible. However, he was able to finally work out a deal where he could come home, but be put on a no-fly list and likely never re-enter the US again. This was because it was determined that Sankat was suffering from depression and mental health issues. Now, I don't begrudge Sankat at all, as his reported behaviour does display mental health problems. That said, there do seem to be double standards at play. Mental issues abound in this society. This leads us to ask, how does mental illness factor into the crime situation here? I think it's far more important than realized. And mental illness is surely related to dysfunctional families. Dysfunctional families, in turn, also have economic, cultural, and now ideological components as well, with so many attacks on traditional marriage, traditional families, and the importance of motherhood. Indeed, I do believe we have a serious mental health problem in our country, and it has to do with our dysfunctional society. Pervasive injustice and having no hope for the future, for example, certainly affects mental health greatly. This place will drive any sane person mad. In no way am I saying that it is an excuse for crime or morally releases individuals from responsibility for their actions. But it is something that we need to understand if we want to deal with crime and perhaps even terrorism effectively. We're joined in the studio today by Mr. Daurius Figueira, a criminologist who has studied the issue of mental illness and crime for many years now. But first, we'll take a short break, and I'll see you when we get back. Hi, welcome back. And we're joined in studio by Mr. Daurius Figueira, a criminologist who has spent many years writing about these issues, including mental health and crime. Welcome, Daurius.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in the studio.
My pleasure.
I know you have a lot of very interesting insights into the issue of mental illness and crime in Trinidad and Tobago in particular. So I think that discussion with you on this matter would be very useful for myself, for the viewers, etc., for the country. So the whole Nishal Sankat issue, where mental depression and mental issues were seen to be a cause there about what happened. What's your take on it and in terms of issues that arise from that incident?
Well, I follow the newspaper reports closely. And what I found bothering is the willingness to come to a causal conclusion between the act which Mr. Sankat subsequently pled guilty in a U.S. court for, and which is invading the private property of an international airport, and his so-called mental health issues has never been the subject of firm, conclusive analysis presented to the people of Trinidad and Tobago.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Because where is the expert analysis that he is in fact suffering with depression?
Mm-hmm.
That's the first question that has to be asked. Who made that diagnosis? Who confirmed that diagnosis with analysis?
Yeah.
That is the first thing. Because what happens is that the way it has been presented, especially by a specific media house, is that you must use mental health issues as an exoneration for a criminal act.
Mm-hmm.
But this is as broad as it is wide, because then you could have gangbangers saying that they have mental health issues, so therefore we must take that into due consideration whenever they face the courts for a murder trial.
But I mean, but certainly within our, criminal world, let's say, I mean, the criminals here in Trinidad and Tobago, there certainly is some sort of mental health component. I think from my own investigations into the field. Would you agree?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Like, for example?
But you see, what we need to first place on the table,
yes,
is that we cannot make a causal link between mental health issues and criminality.
Right.
Because then we further burdening people with mental health disabilities.
Right. So in other words, that we don't want to make it seem that just because you might have a mental health issue, then you're prone to criminality.
Yes, yes, because that is not supported by the evidence.
Right.
Because what therefore we need to distinguish between mental health issues and your ability to discern right from wrong,
right,
your willingness to abide by the rules of society and the laws of society, right, and sociopathic behavior.
Right. So just to define for the viewers, sociopathic behavior. What precisely is sociopathic?
A sociopath is an individual who has been socialized in a social order, is fully aware of the obligations placed upon him or her to abide by certain moral and legal codes of behavior. They are well knowledgeable of it, but they deliberately set out to flaunt and break every rule and regulation in the society.
Right. Because they know the rules and they don't care.
And they don't care, and they in fact are predators.
Right.
So they use those very rules and regulations to aid and abet them in their predatory practices. They have no empathy. They have no iota of empathy. Right. They don't care about suffering.
And they get pleasure from breaking those rules. Yes. Some sort of psychological gratification and pleasure from doing that.
Yes.
Yes, yes. How, I mean, in your analysis of let's say the criminal element in Trinidad and Tobago, if you want to put it that way. I know it's kind of crude sometimes to say it that way, but would you say sociopathy is prevalent or among criminals or not? In
all social orders, criminality involves
some level,
sociopathic
almost
behavior.
By definition.
And you have certain types of criminals who are by essence sociopaths, serial killers, serial rapists, gang rapists.
You wrote an article many years ago, I remember, about exploring the idea about serial killers in Trinidad, because this is something people see on TV and in movies in America, but we don't think usually about serial killers in Trinidad. But I remember when you raised that issue. Could you explain?
Yes, the level of especially gun violence in our society started in the second half of the 1990s up to today, is in fact the required spawning ground for persons who practice the art of murder.
Right.
Some of them do it for monetary gain. It's a profession. But what we must understand that in order to be skilled at that profession, you must be sociopath.
Yeah.
And then there are those who do it out of pure pleasure. And those types of serial killers are the ones in which Hollywood and the media tend to place emphasis on, and we get this mistaken belief that it's only that type that exists.
Right.
So within the gang wars of Trinidad and Tobago since the second half of the 1990s, we have professional killers, persons who carry out acts of murder for profit. And in order to be successful at that, and then you have those who do it because of their allegiance to a specific organized crime body. We term loosely in Trinidad a gang.
Yeah.
But they have killed more than one person. They have killed multiples of people.
Yeah.
And that makes you a serial killer. So that is the reality that we have to look at. And their behavior makes them sociopathic.
Right. So do you see it as something causal? In other words, it's some sort of mental condition that then pushes these people towards these evil acts, or do you think it's doing the act itself creates the condition?
It's a bit of both. It is both nature and nurture, because you have to have certain tendencies to lead you into a life of murder by profession.
Yeah.
And to be good at it, you have in that you don't get caught. That ensures that you have to have these tendencies, and these are in fact psychological tendencies.
Because I want you to expand on this, but there's an argument that poverty causes crime. I don't buy that in any simplistic way at all. People were much poorer before. 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago, people were poorer than today. But would you say these sociopathic tendencies, what causes them?
Well, what we know from the life testimonies of professional serial killers by profession for profit, is that it was not the poverty of their life, but the abuse.
Right.
What they have in common is a domestic parental situation of severe abuse, in many cases violent abuse, at the hands of a parent or both parents.
Right. And this includes sexual abuse.
Right? Some of them sexual, a lot of them violently physical abuse.
Yeah.
To the point where as a small child, the physical abuse is so intense that they become numb.
Yeah.
So their developmental process in the childhood stops.
Totally short-circuited. So they have no sense of feeling
Right.
from small.
So from small, they grow in an environment in which they develop no social ties. They develop no deep personal ties. Therefore, they have no empathy.
Yeah.
And the most important aspect of them, they are incapable of loving.
Yes.
They can possess. They believe in possession,
Right.
but they cannot love.
Yeah.
And they are the ones who have made themselves into very, very effective killing machines.
Now, I used to I used to teach with Serval in the life centers in the 1990s. And so the people in the disadvantaged communities, there's something I kept coming across with the young boys in particular, right? Like they just didn't care about anything, right? So one of the things we used to talk about a lot was AIDS and preventing from getting AIDS. It's like, sir, I don't care if I'm going to die. I don't care if I'm dead, right? At least if I'll dead enjoying myself. But there was a genuine feeling that they did not care about the future or anything, and that if they die, that's fine, and maybe it's a relief or something. And it's something I've called Caribbean nihilism. It's a type of nihilism here. How does this relate to what we're talking about here, to what you're talking about?
I have encountered the same worldview over the years of doing my research. What I have learned is that it is now an ingrained byproduct of hopelessness. So you have moved on from hopelessness now to adopt a worldview that is negative of everything. It's nihilist. Nihilist to the point where it is self-destructive.
Yeah.
And you see it in the type of criminal behavior.
It's a type of suicidal behavior.
Yes.
They know they're going to die.
Yes.
And they don't care, and sometimes they want it.
So, for example, you will ask, why do the crime deliberately to do the time?
Yeah.
Do you see that there are means by which you can factor into your criminal actions to evade doing the time?
Right.
So look at all the white-collar criminals.
Right.
And they watch you and they tell you that doing the time is expected.
Right.
It is expected.
It's sort of part of a kind of abuse, isn't it?
Yes.
It's like an abuse they
Yes.
expected and grow up with.
It is self-abuse.
Yeah.
And what I have discovered that is, it is a byproduct of the Independence Project, where you and your entire community, and generations upon generations, have not shared in the promise of independence.
Yeah. So it's not a product of colonialism or the
No.
plantation, but of our own independent society, the dysfunction of our independent society.
Because what has happened to us is that I am of the generation that was of the age for independence to be written on our minds,
Yeah.
right? And that was a time of great hope, great hope and promise.
Yes.
Subsequently, 1962, by 1969, persons were in the streets marching
Right.
because of the failure of the project already. And what saved us was the first oil boom.
Yeah.
What has happened is that we have had subsequent generations of people who have come up, who have not shared, and who have seen others share,
Yeah.
whereas they are locked out.
Yeah.
And one reaction mechanism to the whole affair is the nihilism.
In fact, you know, what you're saying there is important because we lost 2 decades from 1982 to 2000. With that depression there, we lost all our GDP and we only regained it by 2000. So there's a huge amount of things we lost. And during that time is when these people would be born. This is when they would have been born.
Yes.
And 15 years later is 1995 if you take it from 1980 and if you go later. So the generation from that depression in 1980s, so you plant you sow the wind and you reap the whirlwind.
And that is the product. And what is happening to us now, we have gone into another phase of recession now, and this time it is so structurally impactful, different from the rest.
Yeah.
That what is happening to us now is that we have those who came up with the gas boom
Yeah.
does not have a clue of how to survive in the post-gas boom blues.
Right, exactly. Now, given given we have these conditions that create mental problems with people, and that take mental problem and mental issues, going into sociopathy, which then means crime. How do we deal with that in this country? How can we even begin to start to deal with it?
Well, see, we have to now ask ourselves serious questions on the nature of our social structure and the effectiveness of all these social programs, government after government. They have invested billions of taxpayers' dollars into these social programs, and we have to now ask and measure what impact for the better of Trinidad and Tobago did we have.
And what programs would you be thinking of, for example? CPEP or
Everything.
URP or
Everything.
food card? And
Because it goes much deeper than that, because we have insisted on, from government to government, that the problem is parenting.
Right.
And we have invested in all forms of interventions to address the issue of parenting. And they have made no difference.
Yeah.
So what I have noticed now is that we are in this phase now, in this dispensation, we are now going to the new intervention, the militarization of policing. We are following the Central American model now.
Right.
So we are going now to have militarization of policing. We are going now into zero tolerance. We are going now into an entire process that is going to ratchet up the level of violent engagement between state and those who are considered to be criminals.
Right.
And all that does, because it has failed miserably in Central America, all that does is further escalate the level of violence in the society. It does not de-escalate for us to now focus on our human needs.
Right.
Spiritual and otherwise.
Of course, exactly, because this is very much a spiritual crisis as well as a psychological crisis.
Starts with spiritual crisis. It starts with that.
Yeah, so now, in terms of now that we're talking about this spiritual thing, that could take us in a whole realm, but we do have to close up soon. So the thing is that with with the Sankat issue, depression was spoken about a lot, but does depression sort of push one to sociopathy normally? Or?
No.
Yeah.
From the literature, the depression and fixation is two different things.
Yeah.
What the ultimate danger with depression is that you literally desocialize yourself.
Right. So that leads to things like suicide, doesn't it?
Yes.
Rather than
The gravest threat of depression is the end stage where you take your life.
yeah.
It does not manifest itself in the literature as fixation to acquire.
Have you been following the stats on this? Because I, to tell you the truth, I've lost track. I haven't checked recently, but I've read in the newspaper recently that suicide has been on the rise in Trinidad and Tobago. Do you know what the figures are? I haven't checked.
I saw the figures, but I can't recall them. In the Caribbean, we are in the top tier, with Ghana being number one.
Right.
We are in the top tier in the Caribbean.
Right.
So we are the propensity to take one's life is in fact increasing in Trinidad and Tobago, and that is one indicator of the personal stress.
Yeah.
The attacks on the person and the psyche.
Yeah. Well, this is when people talk about crime and so forth, I think a lot of these mental issues of sociopathy and how it's generated is ignored, and we really have to try to wrap our minds and efforts around this problem. But I want to thank you for coming in to discuss this issue. All right, thank you. And we're going to be back after this short message. We've now reached the SMH section, scratching my head, where we look at some of the absurd, crazy things that happen in our country on a daily basis. This week, data and deception. The closure of Petrotrin continues to generate controversy. Official statements keep changing, and because of that, people are rightfully skeptical. For one thing, Minister Colm Imbert has said in his budget statement that Petrotrin, which produces almost 60% of the country's oil, simply does not pay its taxes or royalties, and thus makes no positive contribution to the Treasury at this time. However, the internationally affiliated organization, the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative, whose job it is to see how much money governments are supposed to receive from the oil and other resource mining companies in order to ensure that no deception or corruption is taking place, they have provided different information. That body shows us that between 2010 and 2016, Petrotrin made payments amounting to $20.2 billion. Figures are not available for last year, but that's where we have reached in terms of official tallies. So the organization, furthermore, has stated that the $4.1 billion, which were paid by Petrotrin in 2015 alone, can be used to pay every public servant's salary, pay for gate, and meet the budget in the Ministry of Agriculture. This is a totally different picture than that painted by the Minister of Finance. So what is the truth here? Is someone lying? Or are both sides being technical with the truth? For example, are the payments not considered taxes? Or are these payments offset by other figures that actually make them negative? Most of us have heard the statement that there are lies, damn lies, and statistics, because numbers and figures can be manipulated to make it appear like they support your argument. As citizens who ultimately own Petrotrin, not the government and not the ruling party, we need to find out the truth of this matter. We must demand that this discrepancy be cleared and find ways to ensure that correct data is presented to the citizenry, and penalties are in place for misleading the population, especially on crucial decisions affecting our future like this. This is why parliamentary debate on such a matter, serious as this, should have taken place. In the meanwhile, we're given these contradictory and confusing numbers, and I'm left here scratching my head. Well, that's it for this week's show. Please join me again next week when we'll be looking at another current issue affecting our country and look to find explanations and solutions. In the meanwhile, please check out my Facebook page where you can discuss this and many other current issues with me and many other leading personalities in Trinidad and Tobago. Thanks again, and I'll see you next week.